Hello, hello. Hi, Rob. Hi, Benji. How's it going?
Hey Hugh. Yeah, it's going good. How's it going with you?
Great. Going well. It's going well. Thank you. Yes. A little bit warmer here than it has been over the past couple of days, which is nice.
That's good.
Yeah, we hit like minus 40, minus 42 Celsius. Just,
That's
oh,
just I mean, I'm not even sure that those temperatures exist.
I would say I know it was a little bit crazy. The funny thing is we have, there's multiple weeks a year where we get to watch the Canada geese leave our country because they're smart. And we should all just like do what they do and leave the country. But yeah, instead we have minus 40 days where we stay inside and think long and hard about why did we not leave with the geese?
I can't imagine the energy consumption that you need to do to balance that out as well,
Pretty
right?
high. Yeah, the area that we live in the province that I live in anyways, the building code regulations are pretty high when it comes to insulation for houses for that exact reason. So for the actual inspections to pass, you have to have certain ratings of insulation put in all new houses so that they're trying to help with energy consumption. But yeah, it's high. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, hello all. It's a Monday.
Hello.
Yeah. I think Ivan was going to join, but let's see if he's. I think he was, anyways. I was interested to see if he made any progress on that prototype stuff he was working on. But how is everybody though this Monday? Where do we want to kick things off?
I just edited this discussion. I'll put it in the chat.
Nice.
To just, I think, list out all the options that we discussed.
Yep.
So far. So we have it in writing. Yeah, and I saw that.
Oh, you edited the actual the initial discussion. It looks like,
yeah.
Rob, is that right? Okay,
Yeah.
so you added the full 5 options. Got it. Thank
you. Yeah, I do feel like we're getting close to the point where we have to make a decision and move on.
Yeah. Yes, very much. So
I also saw that Yakov did some work in GraphQL.js.
Yes.
Maybe you want to update us on that too.
Yeah, sure. So I just put up as a straw man the implementation that I have for total deduplication. It relies heavily on weak maps. Essentially, creating each node in the response is associated with its path, which can then be across all the initial payloads and all updated payloads. It can point to a stable object, which then keeps track of whether it's been delivered or not. It relies heavily on weak maps to do that without increasing memory consumption. Meaning, Benji was pointing out how we might want to stream
other languages.
A stream. We might want to stream an unlimited amount of data, and so instead of using a map, we use a weak map in order to retain that ability. If we were, you can easily translate to other languages just by using a map, but then you run into memory consumption issues. And so I think it's sort of it shows that it's definitely possible to implement, theoretically possible, but it's going to require, I think, a lot of refactoring to get rid. I mean, and definitely possible to do. It's just going to require a lot of refactoring to get rid of the weak maps and to have an implementation that doesn't use that might be more easily translatable. So that's what I got so far. I mean, I don't know if that helps us make a decision. but it's something.
Yeah, interesting. It's interesting that when we consider GraphQL.js as being the reference implementation, do we actually consider that the technology used to build the library needs to be carefully weighed because other libraries are using GraphQL.js as the reference implementation they're mirroring? So, talking about the weak maps being supported with JavaScript, for example, like is that type of technical detail something we should keep in mind when we're trying to add new features to GraphQL.js that other languages might not support it? Ivan, you might know the history of the project if that's something we've done.
Yeah, so I would be more worried about not about other languages, but the other implementation of execution. So we have like three main one. One is like I would say like interpretation style thing, using like compiler theory. GraphQL.js is interpretation thing. It's work with IST. Based on IST, it's like executed everything in runtime. It's one approach. Second approach is like query plans. It's basically like advanced version of interpretation. It's interpretation plus planning ahead of time. And third approach is like code generation. And so like, for example, with this approach, if you're generating code, you need to generate codes that have like option. If something is generated code need to have like a state now, and inside the state, it's need to understand if stuff is already sent or not, and based on that, it need to have ifs. If like this thing was already sent, in this case, I'm not sending it. If this thing is like not sent, I'm like, and I'm executing it right now, I need to send it and mark a flag in a state. So like for code generation, for people who try to do like JIT or like generate other thing and execute that thing, it's a little bit different from like interpretation approach where we don't have anything specific to, we don't generate like stuff specific to resolver. We just like go for IST and like maintain maps of what's shipped and what not. So I would be worried more instead of like because in other languages maybe not weak maps, but you can use global thing and you can manually destroy it after query is finished, for example. So you can imitate weak maps. So what I'm more worried about is like how this thing is tied to query planning, first thing, and second thing, like with JIT approaches, because it basically adds complexity where previously everything was simple, like just call this resolver, put this in JSON, call this resolver, put in JSON. Now it's like check if it was already sent in some shared state, and if it's already sent, then skip like this part. I'm more worried about that and like ability of people to squeeze absolute maximum of performance, because every if like it slow down things. Linear code, like the whole purpose of JIT is to eliminate like ifs and cycles and just have like code generated for specific query.
Okay.
Same with query planners. Idea is the same, implementation is different. So we think basically change the model a bit. So previously we knew everything about the shape before we could knew everything about the shape from a query. So we can do like predict all the shape and do like query panel generate code. Now we had like a runtime thing in the mix.
Mm-hmm. Yakov?
Yeah. So then let's just for a second then maybe we'll want to get somebody else want to get back to it. But if we're putting aside the weak maps detail for a second,
Yeah.
was there a different way of implementing this that you think would not have some of the translatability that issues that you mentioned? Meaning, yeah. So this is basically, again, I put it up as a straw man because I wasn't exactly sure the direction that you might take. So yeah, the more you could tell us about that, I mean, I would definitely be interested.
Yeah, in ideal scenario, we have like free. Last time we discussed like free constraints. Either like and you added like basically a fourth option. It's like it's a square right now. You can either have like a predictable response format, so like you know for sure like what path get what, and from a query, and you can, another requirement is to have one payload per path. My proposal break that requirement. Your proposal breaks the requirement of knowing what ship ahead of time, what shipped under what path. There is another thing when you can break the duplication. You can ship one path, one payload per path, and you can you can have predictable shape of that payload, but you need to have duplication of fields. So I'm like, and fourth option, you can have like one payload per path, you can have full deduplication, you can have like a predictable shape, but you need to walk some of responses until you know for sure that other responses already shipped. So I think it's like now we have like with square, we have like 4 assumption, and for proposal, each of them like much free of requirement, but breaks the fourth. And either we came up like with fifth one that in some way can like satisfy 4 requirements, or we need to choose which one of that requirement is less important.
Yeah, that makes sense. So with that in mind, because I think that captures things really well, do we agree first and foremost, here, I'm going to share my screen. Maybe let's just start and all agree that we have 5 options on the table. Let's just make sure we don't think there's a 6th or a 7th. Is this, so as Rob broke out here, do we all agree these are our options right now? So no deduplication, we're going to make it optional, versus further duplication is optional. I can't say that word today for whatever reason. 4, I believe, Yakov, is what your PR is demonstrating, that full deduplication is possible. And then 5 is the option that you were talking about, Ivan, where there are certain constraints that we could get rid of. So it's full deduplication, but removing the 1 payload per path constraint. So it's a little bit less intensive.
I guess option 4 breaks out into full deduplication, but you know, in my implementation, you're not. It's not clear ahead of time what the shapes will be. And then another option of full deduplication would be where it is clear ahead of time what the shapes will be, but sometimes we may have to lock payloads.
Got it. And is that what you're?
I have the locking payloads like in a separate comment on the bottom because just that we discussed it, and yeah, well, it's all the way at the bottom, that second to last comment. Yeah, so we talked about it last time, but pretty much ruled it out, I thought. So that's documented here, but I'm not gonna, didn't have it listed in like the other options that at the top.
Okay.
I think there is. Go on if you want to.
No. Sorry, Benji. Go ahead.
I think there might be another option, which is the statically determined, like the best case deduplication that we can do in a statically evaluable way.
Yeah.
So we were talking about. Go on.
Yeah. it's up. It's like option number.
Yeah, is that different than option 3?
Yeah, you can do some like deduplication in like we merge differs. By merging differs, we do some deduplication, for example, and we can try like other tricks.
Do you mean
Yeah.
purely like parent-child differs?
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
I think that's kind of what I'm saying. It's not just on the initial payload. It can also like cascade down, but it's always statically. You can always figure it out statically.
It's like 3+.
I'm going to update
It's-
option 3 to that, I think, right? Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Or
I
it's
think
kind
it
of
does.
3, option A is like we don't say what happens below the initial payload, and option B is we have some static analysis rules on what happens with the, or A is we know what happens with the initial payload, we don't know on subsequent. B is we don't know, or we know on initial, we might know on subsequent if it's statically analyzable. There's some rules still about what that is on further payloads.
Okay. So it sounds like Rob, are you
I'll
updating
just
that
I'll
right
just
now?
add another option now. One
Yeah.
second.
I can just refresh.
Maybe
So
we can agree on a background, like
that's what I was going to say.
option option that makes sense as a like at least as a backup plan in most cases, and in investigate like what we basically said like last time. It's like we can evaluate a bunch of options, but it would be great to have like a least troublesome option, or the best out of ones we discuss right now, and we all kind of agree. I'm for example for partial deduplication. If we cannot agree what other trade-offs like make sense, like I'm for having like algorithm in the spec, meaning servers behave like predictable as much as possible, as much as it makes sense. So no deduplication, for me, it's like it's create a problem. Optional deduplication, it's like it would be weird if you get like some servers will try and some not, especially since we can document with algorithms and it's not super complicated algorithms. So I'm like waiting for option 3+, like what Benji proposed, like deduplicate as much as possible, and to maybe and eliminate option 1 and 2 from a list.
And so I do have listed out for both 3 and 4 that like this, we're specifying that like this amount of deduplication has to happen, but servers are allowed to do it even more efficiently. Maybe they do implement Yakov's algorithm with weak maps or something. And is that okay? Like we should leave that optimization open in the spec?
So we have like constraints, and I'm worried that if we leave constraints unspecified, if they constrain or not, some servers will assume that constraints, but some clients will assume that constraints based on working with particular client. So for example, GraphQL.js implement like will break, will not break, will have predictable shape. But GraphQL tools will have modifications that implementing using weakmap, implementing different shape per path. And if somebody will do like a coding, will have a client working with only GraphQL.js, this client can be like coded in a way that it's assumed shape is predictable. So I'm like for specifying stuff in the spec. If we say like shape can be changed, so like certain fields can be sent in like parallel defer hierarchy, we need to specify it in the spec. We cannot just omit it.
Yeah, I think it's important that we say what is allowed, and that we have some form of test case or like example shape in GraphQL.js, even if it's like, oh, not even at the necessarily executor level, but like hey, this is a permitted response. I don't know how you do that in GraphQL.js unless we like had two different implementations, which maybe while we're in like stage 4, or even like while the spec does not specify what the algorithm is, it might even make sense to have both algorithms and a flag or something. Just
so
to,
yeah. So does that mean we're leaning towards 3? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think
Not
it
at
was
4
4,
scale.
right?
Or was it 4? Okay.
Yeah,
yes. Yeah, I'm like, for example, we cannot. I'm thinking option 1, 2, even 3 can be eliminated from
1 and 2
from
sure.
arrays.
Yeah,
and option 4 is like represent this branch of thought.
Okay. Yeah.
I think.
Go ahead.
So I talked with Kawai about option 6, about Ivan's proposal, and one of the things that came up was like, at the limit, if you put a defer on your single root field, this essentially allows infinite responses to come back, or as many responses, like one response per field. And so, or per path. And like, I think that would be very surprising to end up with like a server that decides, oh, once I hit defer, now I'm streaming in every field, because that would be spec compliant in that case.
We discussed it last working group. So updated version, I will write updated version saying like server should batch up like shared part.
Yeah,
like,
I think,
and ship it together with like basically ship things that satisfy at least one defer.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
You could, I think this is possible. I need to like sit down and map out a query, but I feel like you could write a query in a way that has like an exact overlap of fields and defers that basically essentially gets you to one field per response.
Right. But unless there's an at defer on a field, it would be very surprising to basically get that in. Basically, at defer tells you what the like locations of the batched response should be. And so, if you have at defer on every single field, then you are expecting essentially a stream of responses, and that's fine. But you as the client person have explicitly asked for that in that case.
Yeah. I
And
just wanted
so,
to compliment. Oh, sorry.
for option 4, what I'm imagining is that the spec describes an algorithm that does this deduplication between the initial payloads and defers that have this parent-child relationship. And that's basically the ones that we said had to be delivered in a certain order, I think. But there's a note that says that you're allowed to optimize further, and that any fields could be dropped as long as those fields were sent in a previous response. So that means that server that does want to, because I think there's like pretty big trade-offs for actually implementing that, but if a server does want to do it, they are allowed to. Are we in agreement on that's what option 4 means?
I think so. I think
Yeah.
so. The other thing, there's the flip side of that, which is that we are enabling servers to not depend on, like, servers are not required to block on on fulfilling a defer that is like ready to go just because a different one that they might be able to deduplicate with isn't. Right. That's basically.
Yeah.
One clarification: if we say that stuff can be dropped from a payload if it's fulfilled in parallel, not child-parent relation, but in parallel sequence of like defer. So that means we force client to merge everything into one tree. It's the same requirement as my proposal have, but I want to make it clear that now you cannot do like getting a path, like if client registered for particular fragment without my and like Yakov proposal, you can get this certain path from initial response, and you get like this payload from incremental. You can merge it, and you get result. Now you need to, now since your data can be shipped under different path, so like in Rob example, if like if you have like branch A and branch B, and branch A so field A executed faster, it means you get this data in that branch under like different path. So now this like shorter path is satisfied. Yeah, like for example, so field B is faster, A is faster, and you get it. So your E and F is shipped under a path A and B. Mm-hmm. But it satisfies defer under path, under empty path. And this makes sense only if you maintain one tree and do merge and connect tree. If you get like empty path from initial response, meaning like object with just C and D, and you apply stuff that you receive under empty path, which is GH and so field B, you receive like incomplete data. You miss E and F. And I'm like for everybody to understand this, and we also need that document that in the spec, because clients need to be cautious that data contain not only under like that path inside the initial response and that path under incremental, but also in other paths inside the incremental. if we allow with like further optimization by server.
So does that change anything we would need to do for option 4 then, Ivan? Or that's just a call out that we'll have to make sure people know of?
Yeah. Call out for us to understand and for us to document in the spec.
Okay.
Like specifically saying like have example and explain it's possible, and you should code the client in a way that supports that. Basically, you do like patching. You patch initial response, and you get the whole data for particular path from that patched tree. You're not trying to like be clever and use like initial response or part of initial response in one incremental per path that you get. Yeah.
Okay.
You're saying you have to use all the incremental payloads that came before, right?
Yeah. Because like if server can decide that server already sent that under different path, it can drop it there, and you cannot even predict if it was dropped due to inline fragment condition, like on some type, or it was dropped like for some other reason. So like and you cannot, without like complex query analysis, you don't know like which path to look. So basically, like simplest solution is to maintain patch initial response with every incremental you get. And if you, when you get particular path, so when you get like first defer, from example, under path AB, you need to patch everything, and you need to go to like patched initial response and get stuff under AB. So everything should go through like store, not store, but like representation of payload that you patch.
Okay, well, sounds like we're leaning towards 4, but I'll just play devil's advocate for a second here. Yakov's work is pointing towards the fact that number 5 is possible. There's complexity. There's a lot of work that would need to be done. There are possibly limitations in other programming languages if they try to refer to GraphQL.js as being what they're mirroring. So there are some caveats here for sure. But do we feel that the constraints for 5 are enough for us to say we should not go with full deduplication and that 4 is a better choice?
For at least like, as I understand like Rob formulated it, it's all 5. It's not, it's like can instead of should.
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
So like, if I correctly understand, option 4 allow you to do option 5 if you want. So
right.
Basically can, but it doesn't require you to do that. So it doesn't say should, it say can.
Yeah,
so
exactly. That's what I mean when I say further deduplication optional on option 4.
Yeah. So what would GraphQL.js do? Would it do it or would it not do it?
It's a good question, because like we kind of assume GraphQL.js is written in a way that should be easily replicatable, and it's the simplest, like kind of simplest implementation. If you want to have like some other trade-off or some advanced option, you do your own stuff. So if you implement option 5, it's mean like technically anybody can do option 5. So
yeah,
I'm like, it would be weird if we implement option 5, but
Recommend 4.
say, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that GraphQL.js should literally be doing what's in the spec algorithms.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
if we're specifying 4, then that's what it should do. Or if it does want to, if we do figure out how to do 5, but it requires weak maps, it should probably be opt-in with an option or a flag or something. Or if we figure out a really easy algorithm to do 5 that has no trade-offs, then we should go back and update the spec from 4 to 5, and that's not going to be a breaking change for anyone.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, so basically the spec text right now should be considered 4, but because we're still experimenting, like it could be upgraded to 5, and we could even ship the spec for 2023 or whatever with 4, with the understanding that we're like 80% confident we can get to 5.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I'd like to also keep in mind that, as Ivan was talking about earlier, with the different approaches that servers take to resolving GraphQL, it may be that certain types of servers may never want to implement 5 because it means that they have to do this dynamic tracking, which they may not want to do. So I think taking the option where we specify 4, but we allow 5, allowing 5 is just basically an enhancement on 4, where when you output the field, you just put if you've already delivered this, then you may choose to not include it. And it's literally just one statement almost as part of the algorithm. That way, the client would always need to support both, which should be good in general. It allows us to do the most efficiency if we absolutely need to. But I think efficiency for the sake of efficiency, or pushing efficiency to its absolute maximum conclusion, is not necessarily the best thing to do. And perhaps the computation that is required to achieve 5 is actually more expensive than just delivering the duplicate data in some cases. So my preference is 4, but I think allowing 5 is reasonable. And mostly that is saying a client needs to expect that this might change or might not be present, and that should be fine.
Yeah. And 4, as it's worded now, does allow 5. So I think 4 seems like the way to go.
One small thing I just thought about that. Did anybody thought about query complexity, part of denial of service prevention is query complexity analysis, but with duplication. Ideally, we execute resolver once, and we just cache response, even if we duplicate. So execution of resolver is not the problem, but size of response is a problem. So with current algorithms for query complexity, you see one field. As Rob said, you can write a query by hand, which have a lot of duplication, which provokes a lot of duplication in parallel hierarchy. But since it's one field or series of fields, cost can be low, but duplication is high. Cost per query analysis is low, but amount of data actually sent is high due to duplication. Is it concern or not?
It definitely changes the equation for an existing query complexity algorithm that doesn't know anything about defer. Could definitely be making the wrong decision, right?
Yeah. It's probably okay that that is the case though, because, you know, query complexity is not something that the specification is touching on. So anybody that has their query complexity algorithms or products or solutions, they're going to have to understand that as the spec progresses, they're going to have to consider updating their implementations. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think we talk about query complexity at all in the spec.
So my position for that, it's like we don't have it in the spec, but yeah, and updating it's okay. If like people update query complexity, it's okay. It's a question: is it like are we breaking query complexity at all, or query complexity can be implemented in some way with which like predicts it? So basically, it's not a question like it's okay for people updating whatever library they use.
It's not like, hey, we're introducing a breaking change. It's, hey, are we introducing something that is going to make this very difficult for people to work around? Yeah.
Does Apollo do query complexity analysis?
Ask me that question in a couple months. Yeah.
I guess my question is there someone that we could pull in to take a look and make sure we're not making their job impossible?
Yep. David Glasser is the person to bring in for sure. And I can ping him on that. And Ivan, definitely feel free to ping him as well. He has lots to say on this for sure. Yeah, we can follow up on that after this call. What's the gist, Benji? Hold on, click on it.
Yeah, okay. So Yakov asked like for an example of the like parent-child stuff, and effectively, because I'm trying to think about how this would relate to stream as well, which obviously makes things a little more complicated. And keep in mind, I've written this whilst on the chat, so there's almost certainly some issues in here. But effectively, this is what I'm thinking from a reasonably complex, statically solvable thing with lots of nested defers and streams and whatnot going on, that you can effectively convert it into the later thing. Now, as we've discussed before, we won't actually be doing query rewriting. This is just for us to think about it in terms of this. But I think that the upper query can be converted into effectively the lower query, and it still gives us those guarantees that when a particular fragment comes through. I haven't actually bothered naming the fragments, but I've put little Matt's Dunder type name hacks in them so that you can see what they would have been called if they'd have had those things. You can see at each point which ones of those are solved. There's some interesting things in this. For example, some of the fragments actually get the fragment aliases actually get resolved at a later time than all of the data that they care about is present. So for example, the A, B, E, F is available pretty early, but because we've got the has fragment 2 in there, that actually doesn't get resolved until the defer, even though the F itself was actually previously resolved. But I think that's a problem we're going to have anyway, so I'm not too worried about that. But yeah, this is how I would like to see it. Effectively, it's merging all of the defers that happen at any one particular path, and doing anything that we can to statically ensure that every bit of data that you need before a certain time is already going to be present. Should significantly reduce the amount of duplicate data that you receive, but without going quite as far as to do 100% full deduplication.
Yeah, so the caveat of 4 right now is that No one has written an exact implementation of that yet, so there definitely could still be some surprises, but this is a very good test case. And
Yeah, very much.
I want to spend some time with it in the implementation, see what that looks like. And
who's writing the initial implementation work for GraphQL.js? Is that something you're going to do, Rob, or is that continuation of your work, Yakov? Or
either way, I could build off what Yakov did, or if he has time to help out too.
Yeah, well, that would be great, especially since like now Yakov's proposal is basically like option 5. In it, it's have like some stuff from unrelated stuff that we already said, like removing labels. So it would be great to like remove labels and move towards option 4. So even if we experimented, try to do option 5, option 6, or maybe somebody came up with option 7, we have like at least baseline. So like the PR is shorter, because currently Yakov's PR is like removing labels, and option 5 is not about labels in any shape or form. Yeah. So would be great if we update it based on consensus.
So to break it out, I think we can do one PR that does all of the merging that we talked about with no deduplication, basically option 1, removing labels in that PR. Then we can do another follow-on PR that implements option 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or we can do like whatever would make your life easier. We can do like deduplication with initial response, for example, if it would be easier to implement. So it's like purely based on implementation. But yeah, if you all agree that we move toward option 4, and I like Matt's proposal that we agree on option 4 as a baseline, and we try option 5 either as PR on top of it, or like flag, or like something. Maybe it's like for a period of time it will make sense as like
it seems
short pair on top.
So I don't know if this is just me, but it seems a bit odd though that if, picturing not people that are implementing other libraries similar to GraphQL.js, but picture users of GraphQL.js. Like if I'm a user of GraphQL.js, I just want GraphQL.js to do the best thing it possibly can. So hiding the full duplication behind a feature flag seems a little odd for most people who are using the library, because they literally just want to grab it and have it do the best thing it can, which is 5. So that seems odd, but the feature flag is there because GraphQL.js is a reference implementation, and we want to make sure that we're matching the spec, which is option 4, and we want to make sure that other people that are using GraphQL.js as a reference point can implement along the lines of 4. So it just seems odd though, like there's 2 different ways that we're looking at GraphQL.js here, but I think the vast majority of people that would want to use it would want 5, without a doubt. So
I'm still not sure that's the case, that 5 is like actually the best option, because I think that if we run benchmarks, it could be that it doesn't perform as well.
Yeah.
So
I'm assuming that we find a way to make it awesome, but you're absolutely right. Like if it's going to be slower for any reason, then for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and second point, we treat it as like finished product, but we have like some work to do. Even leaving this thing aside, we need to work on pending, and we need to, I think, like also think about stream and like done in the stream and some other things. So I expect like we still have a baseline and window of experimentation.
Okay.
So I would treat this feature flag not as like a state for long years ahead of us, but as Matt said, like our attempt to do a better, have like a good thing, but attempt to do a better thing. and figure out like trade-offs, and can we make it like into a spec? Can we make it golden standard? Option 5.
Okay.
So I'm like, yeah, in ideal scenario, we move toward option 5 as a without any flag, but as a road to that, we have like option 4, and we will experiment on option 5.
Okay.
I should also like comment that GraphQL itself already has duplication issues and it doesn't care. So for example, if you request a list of blog posts and then the author of those blog posts, you might get the same author come up in your response like 20 times.
Right.
And that's not an issue. Like GraphQL doesn't really care about that. So I think that we shouldn't really care about that too much as part of this. Like, obviously we don't want the exploding issue that I raised, originally that kind of started this conversation. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to go as far as we possibly can.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we should probably be optimizing the actual whole GraphQL output anyway. And another thing is this could be seen like if you want to go further in the deduplication step, you could see that as a transport optimization rather than a spec level data optimization. So we already have things like GraphQL Crunch, for example, that like take the various keys and map things through, and you could do a similar thing to like stream and defer. So I don't think it's necessarily most valuable. We generally prefer simplicity. So I personally am still very much in favor of option 4, and I don't see option 5 as being superior. It's superior only in forms of the actual size of the data, but it's not simpler to understand. If you look at one of those payloads in isolation, like sometimes it's got 3 fields, sometimes it's only got 1. That's weird. Why is that? There's various things about that make it less good. The one thing it is better at is the ultimate size of the data, and that isn't really as important as we might, think it is at first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good call out.
One thing I will clarify, because like we have duplication above GraphQL levels. Like for example, in JSON, in some formats, you can replace data with reference. Like for example, gzip, when it's find like repeat endpoint, it's reduced with reference. Or in YAML, you can have like references to values. But in JSON, you have like duplication, and there is no like way to remove them. But at the same time, JSON itself doesn't have duplication on its level. It's mean like it doesn't provide you mechanism to remove duplication inside your own data, but it doesn't duplicate itself. In JSON, you shouldn't have like the same key repeating twice. It's like incorrect. In the same way, GraphQL currently it doesn't give you instrument to reduce to like reference values or like other mechanism to reduce your payload, but at the same time, currently it doesn't duplicate. Like if you have one field inside the query, you will have one value in response for that path. Like obviously, if path include arrays, you will have as many as items in arrays, but you will not have like 2 values for one value inside the query, even if it's inside multiple fragments. Inside
not totally
other
true.
things.
That's only if you consider the value, the path, because aliases like field aliases.
Path. Yeah,
and
path.
So we do provide a mechanism to opt into duplication.
We provide. I agree. But it's based on a structure. So the same way, it's like you can have the same value in JSON at the different key, and there is no like way to reference it. YAML solve that problem. When JSON and GraphQL doesn't solve that. But yeah, we don't have like.
We're not switching to YAML.
But we move it even further, like here, we're not providing a way to deduplicate, we start duplicating even if you're not changing the path, basically, which is a new thing.
Yeah, and I think at some point users, developers who are building their applications and using GraphQL, they do have to take some responsibility for the choices and understanding what they're sending into their servers. So when it comes to deduplicating, I think option 4 is great, but I don't think we should ever try to take away the responsibility completely from the developers that are building things. So. We're almost out of time, but I don't know. I saw your comment, Yakov, saying you think you could modify your PR into option 4. So I guess the one thing we should just all align on before we get off the call is who's doing that work, because it sounds like it could be you, Rob, or you, Yakov, or even you, Ivan. Who's tackling that one?
Yeah, I can coordinate with Yakov and we can figure it out.
Awesome.
Okay, so sounds like we're all on board with option 4. There could be some surprises when we implement it, which if so, we'll regroup. We also, Hugh, you're gonna talk to David just to make sure that we're okay on the query complexity analysis.
Yep, absolutely.
But yeah, so we'll see where we are next week on that.
Matt, did you want to invite, I don't know how to say her name properly, sorry.
Kiwei? Yeah.
Kiwei? Should she be at these calls? Happy to add her to the invite, if so.
Yeah, I can message her /forward.
Yeah, order the invite. Be great.
I don't want to open a discussion into this now because we're right at the end of the meeting, but I do want to flag it, which is we've talked about removing the labels, which is great, but we will definitely want to have a way of saying that these two things at the same path should be executed independently. We've talked about using named fragments as a way of doing that, but I think if we're going to rely on that, then we need to potentially put the pressure on getting that into the spec higher. If we can't get that into the spec, then we may need to revisit some of those decisions when it comes to defer. So, for example, giving it like a priority flag, because it's going to be important potentially for clients to understand that. But yeah, I just wanted to flag that.
And
yeah, do you think that's something that would block defer?
I think if we avoided having any of the things like, oh, there's only ever going to be one at a particular path, then we should be okay, because then, especially if the client doesn't need to understand where the defers were. So one of the things you might see in my solution is that the paths don't, oh, maybe that's not true. But anyway, the IDs proposal that I raised, 6 weeks ago, whenever it was, basically told you the server's doing stuff. It's not necessarily stuff that you've specifically, which things it is of what you requested that it's doing. It's just saying there are open promises or open whatevers. And so long as there's something like that the client can see there's stuff in progress, then I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, so like once we're pretty set on the deduplication, then the next thing that I want to discuss is it's discussion 66. And that's where we can workshop the specific, like, I'm assuming we're going to have some kind of pending indicator, and we can workshop exactly what that looks like. That's the next thing on my agenda for this meeting.
Perfect.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay. Anything else to cover quickly? Sorry, Yakov, you just messaged something. Implement as a separate layer. Got it. Okay. Cool. All right. Well, is that it? That's all. Seems like we're making progress. Agreeing is step one in the battle, winning the battle, right? So Awesome. All right. Well, thanks all. Enjoy the rest of your Monday, and we'll talk again very soon.
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Catch you
Yeah,
next time.
take care. Thanks. Bye.